It's still a desperate situation in Kherson and downriver, Matt. And they came under shelling again today. People being rescued. They've survived the flood, and now there's a danger of being killed by the Russians again. Water has now peaked, and it is rushing out with pollution and debris into the Black Sea. Several reports, including one from a Norwegian Institute of Seismology, saying that there was an explosion at the dam in the early hours of Tuesday morning, all pointing towards it being Russia who blew the dam and caused this crisis.
And what about the so-called counter-offensive, which is now, an offensive on both sides, really?
Well, Ukraine is still saying pretty much nothing about that, being silent. But the Russians are saying it's definitely begun and that there is a lot of fighting going on. And our independent sources suggest that too. There's fighting going on in an arc from the southeast of Zaporizhia round up to the north towards Bakhmut. The Russians released picture today, which they say shows them destroying several Bradley armored vehicles. Those are American vehicles provided to Ukraine, and German Leopard tanks. Now, I think that the numbers that they're claiming are not credible, but we are hearing that there has been some destruction of Ukrainian armor, and that's not surprising. That's what happens in war. These Western weapons, they're not magic, they're not bomb-proof, but we are hearing that this is a very difficult fight for the Ukrainians in these early stages. Now, there's other things going on too. There was a drone strike in Voronezh, that's inside Russia, which injured 3 people today. The Ukrainians, they don't ever claim those strikes within Russia, but it is certainly part of the counteroffensive to support groups which are doing that, to try and take the war to the Russians. President Putin, well, he was seeing his friend President Lukashenko in Belarus today and saying that those nuclear assets he has in Russia, he's going to be moving some of them to Belarus in the coming weeks. That's theatre, but it's also a threat. It's a threat to make the West nervous, and it may well succeed. Because when you look at this very beginning of the counteroffensive, the Ukrainians have got to push the Russians back. They've got to win. The Russians are dug in. All they've got to do is not lose.
Lindsey, thanks very much. Well, I'm joined now by Dara Masikot, a senior researcher at the RAND Corporation think tank and an expert on Russian military strategy. Thank you very much for coming on the program, Dara. Tell me, you heard what Lindsey Hilsum just had to say there about the Russians have to not lose, the Ukrainians actually have to win. That is a fair point, isn't it?
It is. What the Ukrainians are doing right now is one of the most difficult operations that an army can do, trying to breach prepared defensive lines. And it's really early stages, and I agree with the previous comments that everything coming out is essentially from Russian media at this point. So it's very fragmentary, and we have to evaluate it closely.
And is one of the problems here that our expectations, also perhaps the Ukrainians' expectations of their success, were raised impossibly by the extraordinary lightning speed of their last counteroffensive in September?
Well, there's a few key differences between September and now. At that point, the Ukrainians were able to advance on Russian troops that were very sparsely located. They were very low readiness. In contrast to what's going on now, they have multiple defensive positions. So I think it's going to be a bit slower going.
So the Russians really just have to dig in further with their 4 lines of defense at the moment. And it's going to be very hard for the Ukrainians to break through that.
It might, but there's 2 things I'd like to highlight. Yes, they are relying on their positions and artillery fire. They are also able to bring in helicopters and air support sometimes. But the thing to consider is the people occupying the positions on the Russian side, their morale is highly variable, from very tired and exhausted to bad and poorly motivated soldiers. So we really don't know what's going to happen yet until Ukrainian forces actually reach those Russian positions.
But
right now they're on the...
Right. And is there a danger that we might have been underestimating Russia's ability to learn from its past mistakes in this war?
Well, they are on the defensive now, and they have shown a slight more competence than on the offensive. And I would like to point out that we just really don't know at this stage, as the Ukrainians are still trying to advance into those positions. And everything that we're seeing is essentially being released from the Russian side to make the Ukrainians, make this look bad for the Ukrainians. So I think we need to wait and see how this effort turns out.
I just want to talk to you about the flood that was unleashed by the dam being blown up. Do you agree with those who think there's a real danger here that Russia could be using unconventional methods of warfare, and therefore by doing something like blowing up the dam, it puts them a little bit closer to possibly using nuclear weapons?
Well, I'm not sure who is responsible for the dam yet. The United States government has said they haven't assigned culpability to it, even with all their resources. So I can't speculate on who at this point was responsible for it. But that dam is in the occupied part of Russia. So Russia bears responsibility for this event, no matter how it turns out. It's impacting civilians. It will impact the agriculture and the ecological system. This is going to be a problem, from what I understand, for years to come. And they do bear responsibility because it happened on their watch.
But does it set up for something more important, possibly nuclear? Briefly.
I'm not an expert on that. I did see that the operators of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant were trying to get as much water from the river in a holding pen for as long as possible. I understand from nuclear experts that there's no imminent threat to that plant, but this is a very concerning situation, particularly if inspectors cannot get in there to evaluate it.